So thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for letting us speak to you. I'm Carole. I'll be doing the first part, then Johan will do a part of the presentation, and then we'll do a conclusion. So we're here to talk about WorkflowHub. So the question that we wanted to address was, where can I find workflows? So there's a whole bunch of different places you can find workflows. You can find them in GitHubs, you can use Google, you can dig through publications, you can find them in data repositories like Zenodo, you can find them in dedicated platforms and community repositories such as NF-Core, for example, Nextflow workflows in the bio community, or Snakemake workflow catalog, and so on. But this is incredibly fragmented. And when you publish a workflow in a paper, it's a crapshoot whether you'll be able to find it. Also, there's no way of being able to really kind of go to one place, which doesn't replace these, but enriches them by providing a kind of front door for all these different kinds of workflow resources. So to overcome this kind of fragmented and rather variable world, we proposed a registry. And this is what the Workflow Hub is. It's a hub of workflows. So it would be a central point, but it's not a centralized store. It's a centralized point of convergence for all of these different resources that I already mentioned. It means that we can integrate them. So we can integrate across the various different resources. We can integrate across the various different GitHubs and repositories and so on. We can make it searchable. We can have standardized metadata and an additional enrichment of the metadata, and standardized and additional ways of being able to, for example, test workflows. We can make them citable, and we can make the whole thing interoperable with other resources, for example, publishing scholarly environments or tools registries, and a whole bunch of other things. So it came out of the European Union, out of a project called EOSC Life in the biosciences, but has since broadened its scope. And our product owner is Australia. That's Johan. So this is our registry for computational workflows. There's a paper all about it if you want to go into more depth. It's been recently published in Scientific Data. And of course, making workflows fair, as you already mentioned, I co-lead the Fair Workflows Working Group of WCI along with Sean Wilkinson. And we've published a paper recently about applying the FAIR principles to computational workflows. I think it's one of the first papers to come out of WCI, which is of WCI. And one of the first principles here is register your workflows in a registry and give them metadata so that they can be found and they can be reused. So obviously a registry is the first step to making your workflows fair. So the Workflow Hub has been going since the beginning of 2020. We started it during the pandemic. It's born of the pandemic. And the very first thing it did was gather together lots of COVID workflows. Currently has of the order of 1,300 workflows, 26 different system types, different languages, over 1,000 users of a presence there, 355 teams, and later on Johan will talk about teams. It has the ability to organize your workflows into collections. It has had up to now about 3.5 million views, and of the workflows that it has registered, we're kind of into the 750,000 downloads area. So it's proving to be quite popular. So the key thing here is one of its popularities is it takes any discipline in any language to any maturity. We basically take anything. Here's an example of biodiversity and ecology workflows that is a curated collection of that particular community associated with an infrastructure in Europe. And it links together workflows associated with that discipline that are Snakemake workflows or Galaxy workflows or Nextflow workflows. So it gives you some idea of the range of workflows that we can carry. So if it acts as a hub for workflows, how does it do that? Well, we frame this around supporting the workflow lifecycle. So let's think about this workflow lifecycle like we think about from the data lifecycle point of view. First, we have to be able to discover and understand them. So that obviously means metadata. We need to be able to support the development and versioning of workflows. So we need to be system agnostic, but also do native repository support. And that means your workflows are developed typically in a Git environment. So we need Git integrations, and we need to be able to support versioning because we need to be able to support any stage of the development. So you can have workflows that are half cooked, workflows that are quite mature, workflows that are published, which you want to stabilize because they're published and related to a particular journal, but then you still want to evolve them into new versions and so on. So we have to deal with that whole life cycle. We also, possible, want to be able to execute and reuse them. And we don't, as a platform, the Workflow Hub is a registry. It's not an execution environment, but we want to lean into execution environments if they're available for us to be able to launch workflows from Workflow Hub into those execution environments, or to have the Workflow Hub searchable within those execution environments. We need to also do a lot of kind of additional information and metadata around the workflow. So, for example, links to documents like test data documents, reference data, guides, things like this, supporting different kinds of artifacts associated with the workflows. So, for example, configuration files for parameters and so on. To also support metadata extraction. So our workflow systems are mixed in the way that they present their metadata. And of course, key to registration is metadata. And we have things like integration with other registries like bio.tools, which is a tools registry in the biosciences world. So if you have steps in your workflow that are also registered in bio.tools, that crosswalks to that registry. And then we also need, when we're going into the scholarly communication world, these are actually scholarly artifacts in their own right, where people should get credit for them. We want to be able to give attribution and citation for them. So mint DOIs for the workflows, link them to ORCID records, give credit, and so on. So this is the kind of life cycle that we're supporting. Of course, I've already emphasized metadata because I'm a big metadata type person. So we have metadata in various different forms using global and community standards. We have used the bioschemas, which is a version of, it's an opinionated version of schema.org. And there is a bioschemas computational workflow profile that we've developed. With alongside a tools profile, actually. There's an EDAM ontology, which is an ontology of informatics. It came out originally out of the biosciences, but now is extended beyond those biosciences. And that's really metadata about the workflow and about the tools and about the parameters associated with it. But then we've also got the fact that we use many different kinds of workflow languages here. So it would be nice to have some sort of common workflow description that was independent of the platform. And for that, we use abstract CWL. I mentioned a lot of things that we want to describe about the workflow, lots of different things like logs may be associated with, say, a workflow execution or companion data objects. And for that, we use a fair digital object format called RO-Crate. And we have two significant profiles associated with that. One is a profile for what is all the information you need for a workflow. And the second is a profile for what is all the information you need for the run of a workflow. So the configuration in order to execute it, but also the provenance and logging of the material after you've executed it. So we have within our integration, one of the things we talked about was integrating with the global system. So we integrate with repositories, we integrate with various different support services, we integrate with various different workflow platforms, with publishing environments and scholarly services such as knowledge graphs and other infrastructures. So to mention that, for example, a Workflow Hub has implements the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health APIs, notably the TRS API. And this API enables you, if you have also implemented it within your execution platform, to be able to browse, for example, workflows in WorkflowHub and then directly execute them in a Galaxy installation, and also browse WorkflowHub from a Galaxy installation. We also use this digital object format where we package together all of the components of a workflow to both upload workflows to WorkflowHub, but also export them to other services like LifeMonitor. And LifeMonitor is a system that does, for example, checks whether your tests are still operating over your workflow for various different workflow languages. And later on, we're going to see examples of that with Johan's going to show you some examples, and I'll show you some examples as well. We also, because we're part of the scholarly publication world, we integrate with a scholarly environment. So journals increasingly including WorkflowHub as a preferred registry for when you have workflows in your publication. So here's a screenshot from GigaScience, which mentions that computational workflows should be registered in WorkflowHub, and you should into DOI. And we have also produced a knowledge graph, which means that this knowledge graph can then be introduced into other knowledge graphs in the community. So you can each workflow can have a DOI. We really want to emphasize that it doesn't replace community and development repositories. It works with them. So that means that we really kind of we expect you to be able to hook up your GitHub and that GitHub link to be able to transport the metadata into the registry, and for us to be able to synchronize with that GitHub resource. Now, of course, you can upload workflows by hand if you want, and lots of people do. We're very generous with our interpretation of what workflows are. So we, of course, allow things like Bash scripts and R scripts and Python scripts. So people have various different ways that they register. So you can register, you can if you have very sophisticated, or you have a good relationship with us, we will do specialist support for you, but you can also just upload them through manual systems if you wish. So this is just to give some indication that, we have a diagram, we have some structured documentation that we come from the GitHub. There's a DOI associated with them and the citation, there's licensing, there's annotations, there's author lists, and so on. If you see at the top of this one, you can see that there's, you can view it on GitHub, you can request contacts, you can subscribe to it to see if there's any changes, and you can also download it as a package. So as this RO crate, which you can then do with what you wish. Now it's Johan's turn.
So continuing with the same theme of how WorkflowHub is actually acting as a hub for workflows, one of the critical pieces of that is the ability to have a workflow developer onboard to the platform and actually begin making use of it. And so as part of that, one of the key things is the presence of streamlined processes to actually get people started. So all throughout, starting with actually registering with WorkflowHub, which you need to do to actually start adding artifacts like workflows, there are wizards included. There are additional pieces added, like the ability to use your GitHub credentials to log in as well. Next slide, please. Continuing on from that, getting you set up on WorkflowHub also has a wizard to accommodate the process. And so the form that you see on the right here, which allows you to specify things like a space, a team, and an organization, which I'll describe in a minute in a little bit more detail. That is again achieved through the use of a wizard. And once you have pushed the submit button here, you're actually set up on the platform, and you're ready to begin using WorkflowHub. Next. So going straight then to workflow submission. The process has very few steps. The first one is to actually upload a workflow. Again, this is a guided process that starts with a dialogue for uploading your workflow from the location which you'd like to upload it from. So your local desktop, a Git repository, even uploading and importing research object crates. Next. Once you've completed that part, you have the opportunity to enrich your workflow entry with additional metadata. So if we take as an example importing a Git repository, WorkflowHub is going to try and faithfully represent as much of the metadata that it can locate within that repository. But then at this stage, you have the opportunity to then have a guided process of adding in additional information that's going to help someone who finds your workflow understand what it does, and aid them in being able to reuse it and understand things like the licensing, who made it, what domain does it sit within. Next, please. And then you can also begin adding context. Now, when we talk about context, what we mean is all of those things that actually give a workflow its meaning, because it never sits in isolation from other things within science. And that can include things like attributions for other workflows, because your workflow might be based on another one. The addition of things like publications, presentations, and documents, all those things that describe the use of the workflow or the workflow itself. Even references to key data files. And as Carole mentioned before, the opportunity to actually reference other registries like bio.tools, which allows a user who's learning about your workflow to learn about its individual components as well. Next, please. And then finally, the ability to, once you've completed those steps, review, update your entry, make modifications, right up until you actually push the DOI minting button, which locks everything in place and generates your persistent identifier. Critical to all of this working is also a fit-for-purpose data model, and a data model that actually allows you to not only faithfully represent the workflow, but actually represent the scientists, the institutions, the collaborations that are actually involved in creating a lot of these workflows. Increasingly, when you have highly reproducible, portable workflows that require a large amount of investment from multiple groups, you see these consortia wanting to have a faithful representation of their contribution, right? They're drawing credit from the workflow that they've created. And the data model is set up to accommodate that. So you can see here, this is a real example of how that data model in WorkflowHub is being used. So if we take the Australian Biocommons as an example, we have an administrative space within WorkflowHub, which allows us to set up and manage teams. The team is the fundamental unit of WorkflowHub. So if you want to contribute to WorkflowHub, you have to be part of a team. You don't have to have a space. If you set up a team on WorkflowHub, you can join the independent team space, which is administered by WorkflowHub. But once you have a team and you belong to a space, you can then start to contribute workflows, collections of workflows, and you can begin adding those context type documents that I mentioned before. Next, please. And so as you can see here, within the Biocommons space, we have a team for the Queensland Cyber Infrastructure Foundation. And you can see here on the right, the list of workflows that they've registered on the platform. And this is just one of the teams that we have within our space. Next, please. As I said before, this data model is really set up to accommodate any type of collaboration or workflow development process. So it works for a single workflow developer or a single lab group that has a team. But as the diagrams here allude to, it can actually accommodate much larger collaborations. So in these two different scenarios, you've got two spaces, which might be big research organizations. Within them, they have multiple teams, and they can relate to workflows in different ways. So those big organizations might develop workflows independently, and they may share them in a collection, which describes a set of workflows for a particular purpose or a particular domain, or they may actually share that workflow development. So the structure is flexible and can accommodate. Next slide, please. And finally, user support is a big piece of how WorkflowHub is trying to support workflow developers and making workflows fair. The first and I think really critical part of this is those streamlined processes and the presence of wizards to actually guide people to use the platform. The wizards are in essence everywhere throughout the process, whether it's setup, workflow upload, when you're entering metadata, the push button minting of DOIs, whether you're creating collections, registering those context documents. So that support is throughout the platform. Next slide, please. But in addition to that, WorkflowHub is really an open registry in the sense that we try and engage with that ecosystem that we're integrating with at the practical level. So the first example of that really is WorkflowHub Club, which is an open meeting, happens every fortnight. Anyone is welcome to join that and take part in the discussion around WorkflowHub, its development, onboarding to the platform, all those kinds of things. We try to contribute to webinars and workshops. So I've included a screenshot there of a recent one, which was designed to help users bring their own workflow to WorkflowHub, get them onboarded to the platform, and get them started. And finally, there's engagements like the Fair Workflows Working Group. So working directly with the Workflows community initiative and the broader global community. And so I think I'm handing back to you now, Carole.
Yeah, so thanks for that. We have a lot of communities. As you can see, we've got over 300 teams are associated with WorkflowHub. And so here's a few cool logos of various different organizations that use WorkflowHub. We already mentioned Australian Biocommons, the Galaxy Training Network deposits all of its workflows there, NFCore, which is the Nextflow bioinformatics community and so on. But the one I wanted to highlight was ERGA and Biodiversity Genomics Europe. So this is a big European, one of those big killer European projects that is all about developing the reference genome atlas for species across Europe. So it's a big effort to try to sequence the biodiversity. And so these following slides are from Tom Brown. And Tom Brown is a champion. He's a WorkflowHub champion within that particular community. So another way we do user engagement is by onboarding champions, giving them sort of special support, and they go out into their communities in order to be able to promote WorkflowHub and support it in the field, as it were. It's a kind of train the trainers kind of model, if you will. And Tom is a regular at our WorkflowHub Club. So these are his slides. And so here's some examples of what he thinks are important. So for example, citing workflows in the method sections of his genome reports to give workflow workflow developers credit. So you could see this is a genome report of a particular reference genome of a mouse, and there is here are the identifiers, the DOIs of the workflows in WorkflowHub. I should also mention that the DOIs come when you decide that you're going to make that workflow a publishable workflow, because once you have a DOI, then the metadata stabilizes. You can, and many people do, have workflows in WorkflowHub which are only seeable by their own community. So those teams that were mentioned before by Johan are have very strong kind of permissions models associated with them. So you can be as secretive or as public as you like. As soon as you've got a DOI, it has to be public, but you can also just do enclave sharing. So you can just do sharing within your own private little group, particularly for those workflows where you feel like you're still cooking them. People tend to do that. So within that program, they use the various different collections and teams in order to be able to bring together workflows of different kinds across a very large European network. So this has got lots of organizations within it, like 40 plus organizations, all doing various different pieces of the project. So they're all using different languages and they're all using different infrastructures. So this is a way of being able to pull them all together within one particular community because it's a language agnostic environment. So we can collect and build a community of researchers within the Workflow Hub through this team mechanism, as well as building a kind of curated collection of workflows of all different kinds within the hub as well. And this actually also helps with training and capacity building too. The workflows that Tom is particularly working on have been run on Galaxy, which is a very popular workflow platform. So if you have your pre-existing, you already have your existing data sets, you can use curated workflows that are in WorkflowHub, and you can then go find that workflow, and then you can press the launch run on Galaxy button, and that will automatically launch the workflow in Galaxy, and also collect metrics associated with, how many people actually access that workflow. So this is actually incredibly important for the workflow developers. So the Nextflow people, for example, were recently required to produce evidence that their workflows were indeed useful, or Nextflow was indeed useful. And they used the Workflow Hub's metrics as their evidence in order to be able to gain additional funding. So that was very nice. They told me that they found that incredibly useful, that they could show visibility, not just visibility of the workflows, but visibility of the platforms as well. So this, we do for certain workflow systems, we provide a privileged support, if you will, or dedicated support. And the more that we see workflow systems become more popular, the more support we give them. So this is one where Galaxy has implemented all of the RO crate infrastructure, so is highly productive with respect to its metadata and how it does its integrations with the APIs. We thought we'd conclude on a few challenges and observations. Well, registration is always a challenge, even when projects are funded to do so. The ERGA project has been incredibly successful because they have a champion. So we are addressing this through nurturing community champions, through our bring your own workflow type sessions, but also really trying to smooth that automation from GitHub. And I think that is fundamental, and it's one of the reasons we emphasized it. Another is actually getting metadata. So it's very hard to have FAIR if you don't have metadata. So we have built, as I alluded to, partnerships with workflow management systems developers in order to be able to lift the metadata out of the workflow systems automatically, and to be able to support the life cycle of a workflow directly with the workflow management systems as well as within the registry. And that's interesting because the range of workflow forms is quite heterogeneous. There's at least 350 different workflow systems. And then there's an enormous number of workflows that are actually R and Python scripts. And particularly in the simulation world. So the biodiversity world, for example, and the social sciences, they basically use R as their workflow engines. And that presents interesting issues with respect to metadata. associated with workflows. But we have workflows ranging from HPC, where registering which machine it runs on really matters. We have workflows that are to do with simulations, where registering what the run setup is really matters. And so we have a full gamut of workflow forms we have to take into account. We've emphasized that we register workflows, but we expect them to be active software, and therefore we expect to support them within their home base repositories. But actually, quite a lot of people do just file and forget archive, as it were, in WorkflowHub, particularly those with scripts, where they actually have the scripts. We are looking after the script. And one of the things that I'm sure that our lead developer would like me to point out is bot battering. So we're very keen on open science, we're very keen on fair. And the thing about making repositories and registries fair at the moment and making them open is they get beaten to death by AI bots. And so we spend a lot of time at the moment doing AI bot attack fighting. So if anybody's got some good ideas, and don't say Cloudflare because we've already got that, that would be great. So some plans and prospects for the future. So obviously sustainability is key. And so we position this as a core resource and core service for national and international infrastructures, notably as Australian Biocommons, in Europe, as part of the European research infrastructures in biosciences. So Elixir, which is the big one that I'm associated with, has sponsored WorkflowHub throughout its life. And this is a service of the European Open Science Cloud. So we've got very strong sustainability paths, both nationally and internationally. We are also cross-walking with other registries. So there's registries, for example, Methods Hub, which is a social sciences registry. There's DocStore, that I'm sure you've all heard of. There's LifeWatch, which actually has registries of biodiversity workflows and so on. And really kind of widening our discipline. We started in the biosciences, but we now have workflows from particle physics, from astronomy, from climate modeling, from social sciences, and so on, for all different kinds. We're obviously doing more added value features, like full fat fair workflows support. Now we've written the principles of fair workflows, and really trying to enrich our metadata acquisition and curation and so on through the power of AI. So can we recover metadata, and can recover things like identifying workflows are similar to each other, or their attribution paths through using AI methods. And finally, we want to be able to embed into communities and embed into fair practice from journals, funders, and policymakers. So incorporate WorkflowHub into fair workflow management planning, for example, and build our community champions network. So here are some acknowledgements. These are just a few of the acknowledgements of people who we really talked about their work here, and or they donated, contributed use cases and slides to us. But we've got a very extensive wider community, both in WorkflowHub, the Workflow RO Create World, and also the Workflows Community Initiative. And these particularly highlighted, as I mentioned them explicitly, workers who champion WorkflowHub within their workflow management communities like CWL, SnakeMake, Nextflow, and Galaxy. And here's a logo cloud, and all these people have collaborated with us and in many cases contributed to the work financially as well as in kind, and we thank them. And that's the end.